A talented pianist, she was enslaved by debt, facing nightly humiliation in a predatory casino. But a dark-eyed mafia boss saw her, claiming her with a diamond chip and a chilling, possessive gaze. He bought her freedom, branding her mine with a forbidden kiss that promised savage protection. Yet, to save her sister, she betrayed him, falling into a deadly trap. Now vanished, can even his ruthless obsession reclaim his stolen prey? The Crimson Orchid Casino Hotel didn't just stand. It dominated the New York skyline, a gleaming monolith of polished steel and dark, shimmering glass. By day, it was a testament to architectural audacity. By night, a beacon for the city's nocturnal elite, its countless windows twinkling like predatory eyes. It promised endless nights of thrilling excess, a sanctuary where fortunes were made and lost in the blink of an eye. For Emily, however, it was simply a cage. Gilded, yes, impossibly opulent, but a cage nonetheless, its bars fashioned from crushing debt and unspoken threats. Every evening, as the city lights began their glittering, indifferent dance, Emily would step onto the raised platform in the hotel's main lounge. The plush velvet curtains, rich and heavy, would swallow her silhouette, making her feel even smaller, more insignificant. She'd settle onto the polished bench before the grand piano, its surface a mirror reflecting the dizzying chandeliers above, tiny explosions of crystal and light shimmering like frozen tears. This instrument, once her closest confidant, now felt like a gilded executioner's block, each performance a reluctant sacrifice. She was 24, with a soul that yearned for the soaring freedom of composition, a heart that beat in rhythm with complex melodies and poignant harmonies. Her fingers, long and elegant, possessed a rare talent, capable of coaxing exquisite beauty from the ebony and ivory. But her reality was a discordant symphony of debt, each note a heavy reminder of her family's crushing burden. A monstrous loan, a beast with Victor Thorne's name scrawled across its dark, intimidating heart, dictated her nightly sacrifice. She played, not for passion, but for survival, her fingers weaving through classical pieces, contemporary ballads, and the occasional jazz standard requested by the high rollers who barely registered her existence. They saw a uniform, a service, never the artist trapped within. Tonight, the air in the lounge hung thick and oppressive. It was a suffocating blend of the clinking of expensive crystal, the low murmur of conversations laced with insincere laughter, and the faint, sweet sickly scent of spilled champagne mingling with exorbitant perfumes and stale cigar smoke. Emily's uniform, a simple black dress with a modest neckline and long sleeves, was designed to make her blend into the background, another piece of the hotel's immaculate, yet ultimately forgettable decor. Her auburn hair, usually a vibrant cascade, was pulled back tightly, braided into a neat bun at the nape of her neck. A few rebellious strands, however, always managed to escape, softening the severe style, betraying a fragility she tried desperately to conceal. As her fingers, usually so confident, hesitated over the cool, smooth ivory keys, a wave of familiar despair washed over her. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the faint, metallic tang of fear pricking at the back of her throat. This was her life now. A talented musician, reduced to glorified background noise. A whisper in a room full of shouts. A ghost haunting her own dreams, silently playing requiems for the future she'd once envisioned. Just play, Emily. Just get through it. The silent mantra was a familiar companion, worn smooth with repetition, a desperate prayer she offered to herself countless times each night. She closed her eyes for a fleeting second, picturing her younger sister, Maya, her bright, innocent smile, the way her eyes lit up at the simplest joy. Maya was the reason. Maya was always the reason. The image solidified her resolve, stiffening her spine, forcing a polite, almost imperceptible smile to her lips. She could endure anything, as long as Maya was safe. Her first piece was a somber Chopin nocturne, its melancholic beauty usually capable of silencing a room, if only for a few moments, drawing listeners into its profound sorrow. But tonight, the indifferent hum of the casino seemed to swallow the music whole. The rhythmic whirring of distant slot machines, the sharp crack of billiard balls from another room, the drone of hushed negotiations, all conspired to drown out her delicate artistry. She felt the subtle vibrations of the grand piano reverberate through her fingertips, up her arms, settling in her chest like a dull, persistent ache. Each note was a small piece of her soul offered up, but no one was truly listening. They were talking of mergers and acquisitions, of stock market fluctuations, of winning streaks and losing bets. Her music was merely a luxurious sound barrier against the cacophony of their avarice, a soothing balm for their consciences, allowing them to pretend they were in a refined establishment, not a den of calculated greed. A group of men at a nearby table, their suits impeccably tailored, their watches glinting like captive stars under the dim, strategically placed spotlights, erupted in boisterous laughter. The sound grated against her ears, a harsh dissonance against her carefully crafted melody. She kept her gaze fixed on the sheet music, blurring the black notes slightly with the desperate concentration required to keep her composure. She could feel their eyes on her sometimes, not on her music, but on her. A lingering glance, a possessive stare, an appraisal that made her skin crawl, leaving an invisible residue of grime on her spirit. She was a pretty prop, a decorative fixture, nothing more. Don't look up. Don't meet their eyes. This was another rule she had created for herself in this gilded prison. Meeting their eyes was an invitation, a dangerous slip that could lead to unwanted attention, lewd comments, or worse, a direct invitation from one of Victor Thorne's cronies. Thorne was a spider in the heart of this glittering web, his influence stretching into every shadowy corner, his eyes, through his network, seemingly everywhere. He was the silent architect of her misery, the puppeteer pulling her strings. She transitioned into a more upbeat jazz number, forcing a swing into her rhythm, injecting an energy she didn't feel. Her fingers danced across the keys, a frantic, beautiful flurry of motion, a desperate attempt to create the illusion of joy. The physical act of playing, the familiar patterns and muscle memory, offered a temporary reprieve from her internal turmoil. For a few brief moments, she was just a musician, lost in the intricate world of scales and chords. But even that fleeting escape was always shattered. A hand heavy and damp with what smelled like cheap bourbon and stale ambition clapped loudly, jarringly, beside her. Emily flinched, her fingers stumbling over a chord, a wrong note echoing sharply in the momentary silence. She instinctively pulled her hand back, her heart leaping into her throat, a frantic bird beating against her ribs. "Hey, doll, play something with a beat." A man, ruddy-faced and sporting a garish pink tie that screamed desperation for attention, leaned precariously close to the piano. His breath, hot and alcoholic, wafted over her face, making her stomach clench. "Something I can shake my ass to." He punctuated his demand with a wet, unctuous wink, his eyes roaming over her with a disturbing familiarity. Emily forced a tremulous smile, the muscles in her face aching with the effort. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm afraid my repertoire is mostly." "Repertoire, schmerpetoire." He laughed, a booming, obnoxious sound that drew a few irritated glances from other patrons, who quickly looked away, unwilling to engage. "Just play what I tell you, sweetheart, or I'll tell Thorne you're not pulling your weight." The casual mention of Thorne's name sent a fresh jolt of primal fear through her. Her breath hitched, catching painfully in her chest. Not pulling her weight. That was a direct threat, a cruel reminder of the sword hanging perpetually over her head. Victor Thorne didn't tolerate insubordination, and he definitely didn't tolerate anything that might jeopardize his investments, which she knew with sickening clarity included her and her family's future. "Of course, sir," Emily managed, her voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to the strength and clarity she usually commanded when she sang. Humiliation burned a hot path up her neck, staining her cheeks a furious red. She felt tiny, insignificant, utterly exposed, like a rare specimen under a microscope. The polished keys suddenly felt slimy beneath her touch. She started to play a generic, upbeat tune, her fingers stiff, her mind screaming in protest against this debasement. Every fiber of her being rebelled, but the image of Maya's innocent face, the thought of her family's precarious future, crushed her defiance. forcing her to swallow the bitter pill of submission. She glanced up, her eyes involuntarily scanning the crowded lounge, searching for something. A friendly face? A hint of sympathy? There was none. Only the glittering indifference of the wealthy, their eyes either fixed on their drinks, their companions, or the flashing lights of the slot machines in the distance. She was an object, a service, a disposable part of their entertainment. The heavy gold curtain behind her suddenly felt like a suffocating shroud, a velvet trap. The dreams she'd nurtured of concert halls and rapt audiences felt like a distant, cruel mockery. The thought of escaping, of running out of this gilded cage and never looking back, was a constant, tantalizing torment. But where would she go? How would she survive? More importantly, how would Maya? Victor Thorne's shadow was long, and his reach, she knew, was even longer, intertwining with every aspect of her life. She was trapped, held captive by a ledger and a desperate hope that one day she might play her way out of this nightmare. But the notes she played each night felt more like shackles than keys. As the vulgar patron finally stumbled away, having seemingly forgotten her existence after his brief, drunken show of power, Emily took a shaky breath. Her hands were trembling visibly now, small tremors running through her wrists. She pressed them together briefly, trying to regain control, to anchor herself. The gentle, almost ethereal scent of the expensive hand soap she used in her tiny staff bathroom clung to her skin, a poignant contrast to the oppressive odors of the lounge, a fleeting memory of purity in a world of grime. She launched into another piece, a desperate attempt to find solace in the familiar rhythm, but her focus was shattered. Her gaze drifted toward the exclusive high-stakes poker room, a sanctum of hidden power, separated from the main lounge by a heavy, soundproofed oak door. It was a realm she never entered, a world she only glimpsed, whispered about by staff members in hushed, reverent tones. That was where the real power resided, the kind that made even Victor Thorne tread carefully, a subtle but absolute authority. A flicker of movement caught her eye. The massive oak door, usually kept firmly shut, opened just a crack, revealing a sliver of the world beyond. Through the narrow gap, she saw a sliver of dark suit fabric, impeccably tailored, a glimpse of expensive leather, and then a pair of eyes. Dark and dense, predatorily still. They were the color of midnight, piercing and ancient, holding secrets she couldn't fathom. For a split second, they met hers across the opulent expanse of the lounge, cutting through the noise, the lights, the crowds, as if she were the only person in the room. There was no warmth, no sympathy, only an unnerving, almost unsettling recognition. A powerful, dangerous stillness. She felt a shiver trace its way down her spine, not entirely of fear, but of an unfamiliar, potent awareness, a cold, electric current. It was a gaze that didn't just see her. It seemed to absorb her, dissect her, understand the very essence of her silent desperation, peeling back the layers of her forced composure. The heavy oak door clicked shut, the brief, unsettling connection severed as quickly as it had formed, leaving only an echo of that piercing gaze. Emily's breath caught in her throat, her chest tight. Who was that? She'd never seen a gaze so consuming, so utterly devoid of casual indifference. A chill, cold and electric, settled over her, raising goosebumps on her arms. She resumed playing, her fingers now moving with a newfound, almost frantic energy, but her mind kept replaying that brief, intense encounter. The ordinary was suddenly, chillingly, fractured. She felt a prickle of unease, a strange premonition. Her world, she sensed, was about to be irrevocably altered, and she had a terrifying feeling that the man behind those dark, potent eyes would be at the very center of it all. The echo of her last, unwillingly played jazz tune still hung in the air, a faint, mocking ghost of her capitulation. Emily's hands, clammy and trembling, rested on the piano keys, no longer producing music but merely bracing her. The humiliation from the vulgar patron's demands still burned, a raw, angry flush on her cheeks. She took a deep, shaky breath, trying to regain some semblance of composure, forcing the polite, distant smile back onto her lips. Her heart, however, thrummed a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of weary resignation. She had just begun a new piece, a delicate, almost ethereal melody that was purely her own, a desperate attempt to reclaim a sliver of her artistic soul. It was a tune born of longing and unspoken sorrow, each note a tear shed in secret. But the fragile beauty was instantly shattered. "Hey, little bird," still singing for crumbs. A voice, rough and cloying, sliced through the music. Emily's fingers froze mid-arpeggio. Her eyes, wide with dread, darted towards the sound. It was him. Mr. Henderson, a man whose expensive suit could never mask the grime of his intentions, a known associate of Victor Thorne, and a regular fixture at the high-stakes tables. He was even more imposing than the last, his girth filling the space before her, his breath reeking of expensive whiskey and cheap entitlement. A knot of ice formed in Emily's stomach. This was precisely the kind of interaction she dreaded, the kind Victor Thorne seemed to orchestrate. Henderson's eyes, small and piggy, raked over her, stripping her of her dignity with each lingering pass. He wasn't merely looking, he was consuming. "Mr. Henderson," she murmured, her voice thin, barely audible above the lounge's persistent hum. "Is there a request I can play for you?" She tried to keep her tone neutral, professional, a shield against his vulgarity. It felt brittle, ready to shatter. He chuckled, a wet, unpleasant sound that made her skin crawl. "A request? I have one, sweetheart. Come here." He crooked a finger, beckoning her with a possessive gesture that made every muscle in her body tense. "Come whisper it in my ear. Or better yet, sing it just for me." His smirk widened, revealing too many teeth, and his gaze dropped to her lips, making her recoil instinctively. The unspoken implication hung heavy in the air, thick and repulsive. He wasn't asking for a song. He was demanding a degradation. Emily's breath hitched. Her blood ran cold, then hot with shame. The laughter from the other tables seemed to grow louder, more derisive, as if they were all in on the grotesque joke. Her hands clenched on the cool keys, her knuckles white. To refuse outright meant incurring Thorne's wrath. To comply meant destroying the last vestiges of her self-respect. "Sir, I can't leave the stage during my set," she managed, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. She hated the tremor in her voice, the desperate plea hidden beneath the forced politeness. She hated the feeling of being so utterly powerless. Henderson laughed, louder this time, drawing more eyes. A few patrons, sensing the impending discomfort, shifted uncomfortably, some even beginning to gather their things. Others, however, leaned forward, a sick fascination in their gazes, eager to witness the maid humiliation. "Can't or won't," he sneered, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. Then he took a step forward, his large, fleshy hand reaching out, fingers splayed. "Don't make me come up there, doll. Thorne won't like that." Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, desperate to escape. She saw his hand coming, slow and deliberate, a predator closing in on its prey. She braced herself, anticipating the clammy touch, the crushing grip, the public spectacle of her inevitable violation. Her mind screamed for her to fight, to scream, to run, but her body was frozen, paralyzed by the fear of retaliation, of Maya, of everything she stood to lose. The spotlight overhead suddenly felt like an interrogation lamp, mercilessly exposing her terror. Just as his fingers brushed the edge of the polished piano, a subtle shift in the lounge's oppressive atmosphere occurred. It wasn't a sound, not a dramatic entrance, but a tangible change in the very air, as if a silent, invisible force had just entered the room, drawing all the oxygen with it. Emily felt it first, a prickle on the back of her neck, a sudden, inexplicable coldness seeping into the warmth of her terror. Henderson's hand froze, an inch from her arm. His crude smile faltered, replaced by a look of bewildered apprehension. Her eyes, still wide with a lingering dread, flickered past Henderson's bulky frame. There, standing at the threshold of the exclusive high-stakes poker room, the oak door now fully ajar, was a man who commanded silence. Luca Conti. He was a masterpiece of lethal precision in a perfectly tailored dark suit, the fabric clinging to broad shoulders that promised immense power. His presence was a stark contrast to the lounge's chaotic energy. He was still, silent, a dangerous shadow amidst the glittering facade. He held no weapon visible, made no gesture, uttered no word. He simply stood, his dark, fathomless eyes, the color of a moonless night, fixed with absolute, unblinking intensity on Henderson. And Henderson, the boorish, belligerent VIP, visibly shrank. The color drained from his face, leaving it pasty and almost gray. His mouth, a moment ago twisted in a lecherous smirk, now hung slightly open, a silent gasp of fear. The bravado, the crude confidence, evaporated from him like mist in the harsh morning sun. He looked like a child caught in a grave transgression, suddenly confronted by an inescapable authority. Mr. Conthi, Henderson stammered, his voice thin, reedy, barely recognizable. He pulled his hand back as if burned, clutching it to his side. His eyes darted frantically between Luca's unwavering gaze and Emily's bewildered face, a man utterly undone. He couldn't even meet Luca's eyes for more than a fraction of a second, his own skittering away like trapped mice. Luca remained utterly motionless, a terrifyingly serene statue. Yet his gaze intensified, a palpable force that seemed to press down on Henderson, crushing his spirit. It wasn't just anger in those dark eyes, it was a cold, absolute judgment. A silent promise of consequences far beyond a simple reprimand. My apologies, sir. I was merely a misunderstanding. Henderson tried to bluster, but his voice cracked, betraying his terror. He took a clumsy step backward, then another, his movements stiff and unnatural, as if he were fighting an invisible current pulling him away. Just leaving. Good night. He practically tripped over himself, spinning away from Emily and Luca, vanishing into the crowd with a desperate, undignified haste. No one laughed this time. A chilling silence had fallen over the entire lounge, as if the air itself held its breath. Emily was left breathless, her body still humming with residual terror, but now a new sensation rippled through her, a profound, unsettling. The transition from imminent degradation to this abrupt, almost magical deliverance was jarring. She stared at the empty space where Henderson had stood, then slowly, cautiously, turned her gaze back to Luca. He had moved, taking a single, unhurried step into the lounge. He was closer now, close enough for her to feel the immense gravitational pull of his presence. His eyes, still dark and unfathomable, shifted from the retreating figure of Henderson to her. This time, his gaze wasn't judgmental. It was possessive. A slow, deliberate sweep from the crown of her head to the tips of her trembling fingers on the piano, as if assessing something he now claimed. He reached into the inner pocket of his impeccably tailored jacket, his movements fluid, efficient. For a terrifying moment, Emily thought he might pull out a weapon, or perhaps a contract, demanding her own payment for his intervention. Instead, his fingers emerged, not empty, but holding something small, sparkling. It was a poker chip. Not the cheap plastic kind used by casual gamblers, but a heavy, obsidian black chip, its edges lined with a delicate tracery of actual gleaming diamonds. It caught the lounge lights, scattering tiny prisms of cold fire across the polished wood of the piano. With a motion that was both dismissive and deliberate, Luca flicked the chip. It spun through the air, glinting, before landing softly, silently, on the pristine sheet music resting on her piano stand. Thud. The sound was barely audible, yet it resonated in the sudden, eerie silence of the lounge. Then his eyes, those dark, dangerous pools, met hers again. There was no warmth, no sympathy, no hint of a savior's compassion. Only a fierce, unyielding intensity that spoke of ownership. A silent, potent message. He had saved her, yes, but he had done so on his terms, for his own reasons, and the price was implicit in that chilling gaze. He hadn't given her freedom, he had merely transferred her captivity. He held her gaze for what felt like an eternity, his dark eyes burning into hers, tattooing their image onto her very soul. Emily's breath caught, held captive in her chest. She felt a shiver, cold and electric, trace its way down her spine. It wasn't entirely fear, not anymore. It was a terrifying cocktail of shock, an unsettling fascination, and a dangerous, illicit flicker of hope. She was no longer invisible. She was seen. And the man who saw her was a predator, magnificent and terrifying. Luca Conti, the undisputed Lord of Shadows and the Crimson Orchid, finally broke eye contact. He turned, his movement as silent and effortless as his arrival, and walked back towards the poker room. The heavy oak door swung shut behind him with a soft, decisive click, leaving Emily alone on the stage, the diamond-studded poker chip glittering menacingly on her sheet music, a cold, tangible symbol of an unseen power that had just claimed its prey. Her fingers slowly, hesitantly, reached for the chip. It was heavy, cool to the touch, its polished surface smooth, the diamond sharp and cold. Her heart was pounding, not just from the adrenaline of the recent encounter, but from something far more profound. Something had shifted. A line had been crossed. She had been seen, saved, and marked. And for the first time in a very long time, Emily Carter, the pianist trapped in a gilded cage, felt a thrilling, dangerous awareness. She was no longer just a ghost. She was now undeniably, irrevocably on his radar. What would happen next? The question echoed in the sudden, absolute silence of her soul, a chilling melody she couldn't escape. The diamond-studded poker chip felt impossibly heavy in Emily's palm, a cold, glittering weight against her trembling skin. It was still sitting on her piano stand, a stark, incongruous jewel amidst the familiar sheet music. The lingering chill from Luca Conti's gaze had settled deep in her bones, a persistent tremor that even the warmth of her quiet, sterile dressing room couldn't dispel. She had snatched the chip up after her set, clutching it tightly, feeling its sharp edges dig into her flesh as if it were a physical manifestation of the invisible chains now tightening around her. She stared at her reflection in the chipped mirror, her face pale, her eyes wide and haunted. The polite mask she wore for the lounge patrons had cracked, revealing the raw fear beneath. Mr. Henderson's repulsive advances, the shame, the palpable terror, it all came rushing back, a nauseating wave. But it was Luca Conti's intervention that truly unsettled her. The sheer, silent power of him, the way Henderson had dissolved into a terrified puddle, the chilling possessiveness in Luca's dark eyes. It was a protection she hadn't asked for, a salvation that felt disturbingly like a claim. What does he want? The question echoed in her mind, a frantic, unanswered scream. He was a predator, that much was clear, but what kind of prey was she to him? Distraction? Curiosity? A trophy? The thought made her stomach churn. Her life was already complicated enough, suffocating under Victor Thorne's thumb. She didn't need another powerful man in her orbit, especially one who moved with such a lethal, silent grace. The next morning brought no reprieve. If anything, the air in the casino felt heavier, charged with an unspoken tension. Emily went about her duties, playing her required sets, but every shadow seemed to stretch longer. Every whisper seemed to carry a hidden meaning. The diamond chip remained tucked away in the deepest pocket of her uniform, a secret burden. Then the summons came. Not a polite request, but a direct order from Mrs. Albright, Thorne's icy-cold assistant, to report to Mr. Thorne's private office immediately after her midday set. Emily's heart dropped to her stomach, cold dread seeping into her veins. This was it. He knew about Henderson. He knew about Luca. Thorne's office was everything the casino lounge was not. Stark, unadorned, chillingly efficient. The air conditioning hummed, low, constant drone that seemed to vibrate with suppressed menace. Victor Thorne sat behind a massive desk of polished black granite, his face impassive, his eyes like chips of flint. The faint smell of expensive leather and stale ambition hung heavy in the air, a scent Emily now associated with deep-seated fear. "Miss Carter," Thorne said, his voice smooth, devoid of any warmth. It was worse than a shout. It was the calm before a storm. "A little bird tells me you've been difficult." Emily's hands clenched at her sides. Sir, I apologize if there was a misunderstanding with Mr. Henderson. I assure you, I am always professional. The words felt like sandpaper in her throat. Thorne leaned back, a languid, dangerous movement. Misunderstanding. I saw the surveillance footage, Miss Carter. Mr. Henderson was merely enjoying your music. And you, it seems, were enjoying the attention of a certain other patron. His gaze sharpened, piercing. A very powerful patron. Emily swallowed, her mouth suddenly dry. I don't know what you mean, sir. I simply play the piano. Don't play coy with me. Thorne's voice, though still quiet, held a razor's edge. He steepled his fingers, his eyes boring into her. My investments require exclusivity, Miss Carter. And lately you've been attracting the wrong kind of other attention. He paused, letting the silence stretch, heavy and suffocating. Your sister, Maya, isn't she due for her next treatment soon? The blood drained from Emily's face. Maya. The name was a dagger, twisting in her gut. Leave Maya out of this, she whispered, her voice cracking. Her carefully constructed composure shattered, revealing the raw, desperate animal underneath. Thorne smiled, a slow, predatory baring of teeth. Oh, there it is. The emotion. Good. Understand this, Miss Carter. Your family's debt is vast. My generosity, however, is not. If you continue to complicate matters, if you continue to attract unwanted entanglements, your sister's treatments might suddenly become unaffordable. He let the word hang in the air, a death knell. Do we understand each other? Emily could only nod, tears stinging her eyes. Her throat felt constricted, making breathing a painful effort. She understood perfectly. She was a pawn, and Thorne held the lives of her loved ones hostage. The golden cage had just shrunk. Desperation gnawed at her. She spent the next few days in a frantic, exhausting blur. During her brief breaks, she would secretly scour job listings online, looking for anything that paid enough, anything that would get her and Maya away from Thorne's clutches. She tried to contact a legal aid organization, her voice trembling as she recounted her situation to a sympathetic but ultimately helpless paralegal. His reach is too far, the woman had said softly, her voice filled with pity. These loan sharks, they have ways. Every door she knocked on, every avenue she explored, led to a dead end, a polite refusal, or a thinly veiled warning. Thorne had built an impenetrable wall around her. The city, once a beacon of opportunity, now felt like a sprawling, indifferent monster. Meanwhile, the subtle interventions began. A new state-of-the-art digital piano appeared in her dressing room one evening, replacing the old, slightly out-of-tune upright. It was sleek, black, with a touch so responsive it felt like an extension of her own soul. There was no card, no explanation, just the quiet, undeniable upgrade. Emily knew, instinctively, who it was from. A chill, both grateful and terrifying, ran through her. He was watching. Always. Then came the other incidents. During a late-night set, a boisterous group of businessmen, emboldened by alcohol, began to catcall her. Sing us something sexy, sweetie. One of them yelled, throwing a crumpled bill onto the piano. Emily felt the familiar flush of shame, her fingers faltering. Just as she was about to force a smile and comply, a waiter, usually timid and deferential, approached the table. He whispered something to the leader of the group, his face pale with urgency. The laughter died. The men exchanged uneasy glances, then, with surprising haste, settled. Their bill and left, their conversation suddenly subdued. No fuss, no direct confrontation, just a silent, efficient removal of a problem. Emily caught the waiter's eye. He merely shrugged, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. Orders from above, Miss Carter. Higher than Mr. Thorne. Higher than Mr. Thorne. The words resonated in her mind, a cold, clear bell. Luca Conti. He was a shadow, a silent guardian, a silent captor. Her fear of Thorn was now intertwined with a growing, unsettling fascination with Luca. He was dangerous, she knew it in her bones, but his danger also brought a strange, illicit sense of security, like finding shelter from a storm beneath the wings of a formidable, beautiful beast. One evening, after another particularly draining performance, Emily was gathering her sheet music, her head aching from the cacophony of the lounge. As she walked down a dimly lit service corridor, the air thick with the smell of stale cooking oil and disinfectant, a figure stepped out from a recessed doorway. It was Mr. Henderson, his face flushed, his eyes narrowed. "So, you think you're special now, huh, little bird?" he sneered, blocking her path. His voice was lower, more venomous than before. "Think you can get a pass from Thorn just because Conthi looked at you once? You're still just a maid who plays the piano. And you still owe us." He stepped closer, his heavy frame looming over her, the scent of his cologne cloying and aggressive. "Thorn says you're making a mistake. A very costly mistake." Emily instinctively pressed herself against the cold concrete wall, her heart hammering. The hallway felt suddenly claustrophobic, the dim lights doing little to ward off the encroaching menace. "Please, Mr. Henderson, I just want to go home." He chuckled, a nasty, grating sound. "Home? Honey, this is your home now. And you'll play by our rules." He reached out, his hand snaking towards her arm, his intentions clear. Just then, a voice deep and resonant cut through the oppressive air of the corridor. It was calm, controlled, yet held an undeniable, chilling authority that made the hairs on Emily's arms stand on end. "Henderson." The man froze, his hands still hovering inches from Emily. His shoulders stiffened, and he slowly, reluctantly turned. Luca Conthi stood at the other end of the narrow corridor, having emerged from a different doorway. He was dressed in a dark, exquisitely tailored suit that seemed to absorb the dim light. His posture was effortless, his hands casually tucked into his pockets, yet his presence was a palpable force. His eyes, dark as polished obsidian, were fixed on Henderson, utterly devoid of emotion, yet radiating a silent, absolute threat. "Mr. Conthi," Henderson stammered, his bravado crumbling instantly. The fear on his face was raw, naked. "She works for the Crimson Orchid," Lucas stated, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "Her performances are for the patrons, not for private entertainments or threats." His gaze flicked to Emily, a swift, possessive sweep that left her breathless, then returned to Henderson with renewed intensity. "Understand?" Henderson stammered, nodding frantically. "Yes, sir. Completely. My apologies, sir. Just a misunderstanding. I was just—" "Leave," Luca cut him off, his voice a flat command, brooking no argument. "And ensure you do not make this misunderstanding again. Ever." The last word was a cold, quiet promise of utter destruction. Henderson, visibly terrified, practically bolted, stumbling down the corridor and disappearing through a service exit. He didn't look back. Emily was left shaking, pressed against the wall, her lungs burning for air. Luca took a slow, deliberate step towards her, then another. He stopped a few feet away, his presence suddenly filling the small, confined space. The faint, expensive scent of his cologne, sandalwood and something sharp, masculine, dangerous, filled her nostrils, a stark contrast to the stale air. "Are you all right, Emily?" he asked, his voice softer now, but still holding that resonant, controlled quality. It was the first time she had heard him say her name, and it sent a strange shiver through her. It felt like a pronouncement. She swallowed, trying to find her voice. "Yes, yes, sir. Thank you." His eyes, dark and piercing, held hers. "Thorn's threats, they are serious." It wasn't a question. She nodded, the terror returning. "My sister, he knows about Maya." A muscle clenched in Luca's jaw, almost imperceptibly. He took another step closer, invading her personal space, but not in a threatening way. More like an inevitability. "He will not touch her. Or you." His voice was low, absolute. But you cannot remain here. Not like this. Emily looked at him, confused. What do you mean? His gaze intensified, becoming a physical weight. You will come to work for me. Personally. You will play for me. Only for me. And in return, I will ensure Thorn and anyone else never lays a hand on you or your sister again. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A demand. An offer she literally could not refuse. The golden cage was being exchanged for another, perhaps even more exquisite, but undeniably a cage nonetheless. She was being claimed. Her breath hitched. The weight of his words, the sheer undeniable power behind them, crashed over her. She was terrified. And yet, beneath the terror, a strange, desperate hope began to bloom, fragile but persistent. Hope for Maya. Hope for a respite from the constant fear. Hope for something else. What about my contract with Thorn? She whispered, her voice barely a thread. Luca's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smirk, a flash of predatory satisfaction. Thorn no longer owns your contract, Emily. I do. Effective immediately. The world tilted. He had bought her. Like a possession. She was horrified. She was relieved. She was utterly, terrifyingly, undeniably claimed. Tomorrow morning, Lucas said, his voice dropping to a low, possessive rumble, a car will pick you up. You will bring only what you need. And you will come to my estate. You will play your music there. For me. He paused, his dark eyes locking onto hers, making sure she understood the full weight of his words. And no one, Emily, no one will ever touch what is mine again. Emily could only stare breathless at the dark, powerful man who had just bought her freedom and her servitude with a single, unyielding declaration. Her heart hammered, a frantic drum against her ribs. She was free from Thorn's explicit threats, but now she was stepping into the gilded, dangerous shadow of Luca Conti, a predator who promised absolute protection at the cost of her absolute surrender. The game had truly begun, and she was irrevocably his pawn. The Blacktown car that collected Emily the following morning was as silent and imposing as Luca Conti himself. It purred through the bustling New York streets, a sleek, dark phantom separating her from the ordinary world she was leaving behind. She gripped her small, worn suitcase, containing little more than a few changes of clothes, and her precious, dog-eared sheet music, her knuckles white. Her old apartment, filled with the ghosts of forgotten dreams, now felt 1,000,000 miles away, a life irrevocably severed. Luca Conti's estate, as she had vaguely pictured it, wasn't a sprawling suburban mansion but an entire penthouse suite, a glass citadel perched atop one of Manhattan's most exclusive skyscrapers. When the elevator doors glided open, revealing a private foyer of polished marble and stark modern art, Emily's breath hitched. The air was cool, scented faintly with cedar and something undeniably masculine. Vast windows offered a dizzying, panoramic view of the city, a glittering tapestry of concrete and light that stretched to the horizon. It was breathtaking and utterly isolating. The stern-faced housekeeper, Mrs. Albright's twin in efficiency and chill, greeted her without a smile. Miss Carter, welcome. Your room is prepared. Emily followed her down a long, silently carpeted hallway, the plush pile muffling her already hesitant footsteps. She felt like an intruder in a museum, afraid to disturb the immaculate stillness. Her room was larger than her entire previous apartment, decorated in tasteful muted tones of gray and silver. A queen-sized bed, piled high with crisp white linens, dominated one wall. Another massive window offered a slightly different, equally intimidating view of the urban sprawl. But what truly caught her eye was the gleaming baby grand piano, positioned perfectly to capture the morning light. It was the digital piano, she realized, the one that had mysteriously appeared in her dressing room. He had anticipated her, even then. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, a strange blend of gratitude and creeping unease. Her first few days were a blur of bewildered adjustment. Her role, she quickly learned, was exactly as Luca had stated, to play for him. Only for him. She would spend her mornings practicing, her afternoons performing in the sprawling, sun-drenched living area, sometimes for hours, sometimes until her fingers ached and her voice grew hoarse. Luca was often present, a silent, imposing figure. He would sit in a dark leather armchair, engrossed in a tablet or reviewing documents, his face a mask of impenetrable focus. Yet she always felt his awareness, a subtle shift in the air, a lingering glance that would prickle her skin when she thought he wasn't looking. He might be absorbed in his work, but she was never truly out of his perception. The music flowed through her, sometimes mournful, sometimes defiant, sometimes questioning. She played pieces that were too complex for the casino lounge, melodies that explored the depths of her soul, her fears, her forbidden hopes. She found a strange, paradoxical freedom in playing for him. He never interrupted, never criticized, never requested a specific tune. He simply listened, his silence more attentive than any audience she'd ever known. It was unnerving and undeniably intoxicating. Emily's internal world became a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Fear was a constant companion, a cold knot in her stomach. She was, after all, a captive, albeit a pampered one. She knew the power Luca Conti wielded, the ruthless world he inhabited. His quiet intensity could turn dangerous in an instant. She saw it in the way his jaw would sometimes clench, or the almost imperceptible hardening of his dark eyes when a distant phone call ended. He was a beautiful, lethal enigma. Yet, a strange comfort began to settle over her, insidious and compelling. She no longer worried about Thorne. Her sister Maya's treatments were not only covered, but now came with the best specialist, the most advanced care. Luca hadn't said a word about it, but the housekeeper had, with a rare, almost respectful nod, informed Emily of the new arrangements. Emily knew it was his doing, a silent, powerful gesture that tugged at something deep within her. He kept his word. His care was subtle, almost imperceptible to an outsider, but glaringly obvious to Emily. The temperature in her music room was always perfect, the light always just right. Her favorite Earl Grey tea would mysteriously appear beside the piano, precisely when she began to feel parched. She once mentioned a slight draft, and the next day, a discreet, custom-built barrier appeared near the large window. He noticed everything. His attentiveness was a heavy cloak, at once suffocating and incredibly reassuring. It spoke of a profound, almost obsessive watchfulness. "You played beautifully, Emily." The words, spoken so unexpectedly, startled her so much she nearly dropped her hands from the keys. It was late afternoon, and she had assumed Luca was in his study as usual. His voice, a low, resonant rumble, came from behind her. She hadn't even heard him enter. She turned slowly, her heart giving a frantic leap. He was standing near the large window, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He looked impossibly sleek, impossibly dangerous. "Thank you, sir," she managed, her voice a little breathless. He took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving hers. "You do not need to call me sir here, Emily." Luca, the name spoken by him, felt like a forbidden caress, a dangerous invitation. Her cheeks flushed. "Luca," she repeated, testing the sound, feeling the tremor it caused deep within her. "It's a habit." He simply nodded, his gaze unwavering. Habits can be broken. The air between them was suddenly thick, charged with an unspoken current. Emily felt a dizzying pull, a treacherous curiosity towards the darkness that clung to him. She knew she should be terrified, should keep her distance, but something elemental in her was drawn to his potent stillness, his silent power. It was like standing on the edge of a precipice, knowing the fall will be devastating, but feeling an irresistible urge to lean closer. A knock at the main penthouse door, sharp and insistent, shattered the delicate tension. Luca's expression, momentarily softened, snapped back into place, becoming the cold, impenetrable mask she was accustomed to. "Enter," he commanded, his voice regaining its usual steel. The door opened, and a man strode in. He was tall, casually dressed in an expensive open-collared shirt and designer jeans, a stark contrast to Luca's formal attire. His smile was easy, charming, a flash of genuine warmth that instantly put Emily at ease. His eyes, a startling shade of blue, flicked to her, then to Luca, a knowing amusement playing on his lips. "Boss?" Always caught in the act of a brooding. He grinned, a disarming flash of white teeth. "And Emily, still enchanting the beast with your melodies, I see." Emily blinked, momentarily stunned by his casual familiarity with Luca and his immediate, friendly address to her. "Hello," she managed, a small, genuine smile finally gracing her lips. "Ryan Blake," he said, extending a hand to her, his grip firm and warm. "Luca's unfortunate conscience and occasional errand boy." Emily laughed, a soft, spontaneous sound that surprised even herself. Ryan was a breath of fresh air in the otherwise suffocating opulence. He was the friendly counterpoint, the easy light to Luca's profound darkness. She felt an immediate, uncomplicated sense of relief in his presence. Luca merely watched their interaction, his dark eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face, not anger, but a subtle, controlled tension. The possessive edge in his gaze, usually directed at Emily, now seemed to encompass Ryan as well, a silent warning etched into the very air. "Ryan," Lucas said, his voice low, a clear edge beneath the calm. "We have business." Ryan merely shrugged, his grin widening slightly, unperturbed by Luca's implied reprimand. "Always business. But first, a moment to admire the music, right, Emily?" He turned back to her, his blue eyes sparkling with mischief. "I've heard you play at the Orchid. You're wasted there. Here, this is better, isn't it? For you." Emily hesitated, her gaze unconsciously drawn to Luca's unmoving form. She felt the subtle weight of his observation, the silent demand for her allegiance. "It's different," she replied carefully, choosing her words. "And much safer, thanks to Luca." Ryan nodded, his smile softening. "He likes to keep his valuables secure. Aren't you, Emily?" He winked. The implication hung between them, light for Ryan, but heavy, possessive for Luca. Emily felt a blush creep up her neck. She was a valuable, a possession, but also undeniably safe. The paradox twisted in her gut, a confusing knot of fear, gratitude, and a strange, nascent attraction that she desperately tried to ignore. She was a bird in a golden cage, and the man who owned it watched her with the hunger of a predator. "If that's all, Ryan," Luca's voice was a low, dangerous growl, cutting through the pleasant banter. "I have little patience for idle chatter." Ryan's smile didn't falter, but a subtle tension entered his posture. He was Luca's subordinate, despite their easy camaraderie. "Right, boss. Business it is." He gave Emily a final, friendly nod. "Catch you later, Emily. Don't let him make you play all mournful tunes all day. He needs a little light in his life." He turned and followed Luca towards his study, leaving Emily alone again. But the room no longer felt as isolated. Ryan's presence had brought a fleeting warmth, a hint of normalcy. Yet the memory of Luca's intensified gaze as she laughed with Ryan, the subtle tightening of his jaw remained. He hadn't liked it. Not one bit. Emily sat back at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. The comfort was growing, undeniably. The fear still lingered, a dark undercurrent, but was now laced with something else, a forbidden longing, a powerful magnetic pull towards the dangerous man who had claimed her. She was confused, drawn into a web of conflicting emotions, each thread tightening around her heart. She was supposed to hate him, to resent her gilded captivity. So why did her pulse quicken, her skin prickle with awareness, every time he entered the room? Why did she find herself searching for his gaze? Her hands moved to the keys, but instead of her usual melodies, a darker, more complex tune began to emerge. A rhythm of raw desire and terrifying surrender, a symphony of a heart caught between fear and a dangerous, undeniable fascination. She was falling, she realized, not from grace, but into the shadow of the man who now owned her. And she had a terrifying feeling that, despite all her resistance, she was beginning to want to fall. The days at Luca Conti's penthouse had settled into a rhythm, one that Emily found both eerily soothing and profoundly unsettling. The grand piano became her sanctuary, its rich tones filling the expansive, silent rooms. She'd spend hours there, lost in her music, the city sprawling endlessly outside the panoramic windows, a glittering, indifferent canvas. The subtle care from Luca continued. Her preferred coffee, a specific Ethiopian roast she'd mentioned once, appeared without fail. A cashmere shawl, soft as a cloud, materialized on the back of her piano bench on a particularly cool morning. Each gesture, so small, so precise, spoke volumes of his omnipresent watchfulness, a silent declaration that nothing about her went unnoticed. She was safe here, truly safe. The gnawing fear of Victor Thorne, the chilling dread of Maya's vulnerability, had receded, replaced by a quiet, almost luxurious sense of security. It was a golden cage, indeed, more beautiful and comfortable than any she could have imagined. Yet, a part of her soul still felt the weight of the bars, invisible though they were. She played for him, only for him. And in his dark, intense gaze, she knew she was seen, desired, possessed. The paradox of her new freedom was a constant, dizzying companion. Her internal world was a swirling vortex of confusion. How could she resent the man who had effortlessly lifted the sword from over her sister's head? How could she fear the quiet, powerful force that ensured her every comfort? Yet, how could she ignore the undeniable truth that she was no longer her own? He was a predator, magnificent and terrifying. And the most dangerous truth of all, a treacherous part of her found his possessive attention thrilling. She was drawn to his potent stillness, the silent strength that radiated from him like heat. It was a forbidden longing, a yearning born in the shadows, that made her cheeks flush and her breath catch whenever he entered the room, his dark eyes sweeping over her with that familiar, claiming intensity. Today, however, was different. Luca had deemed it necessary for her to accompany him to a private art gallery on a lower floor of the building. It was part of his vast clandestine empire, a quiet front for other, less legitimate dealings. Mrs. Albright, with her usual stoic efficiency, had prepared a simple, elegant outfit for Emily, a cream-colored silk dress that flowed gracefully, subtly emphasizing her figure, a stark contrast to her usual performance uniform. Emily felt exposed, vulnerable, stripped of her usual anonymity. The elevator ride down felt unnervingly long, the silence amplified by the rapid thrum of her heartbeat. The gallery was a masterpiece of minimalist design, stark white walls, strategically placed spotlights illuminating avant-garde sculptures and abstract paintings. The air was cool, smelling faintly of new paint and polished metal. A few impeccably dressed men stood in hushed conversations, their voices low, deferential, whenever Luca passed. Emily remained close to him, a silent shadow in his orbit, acutely aware of the curious, appraising glances she received. She was a new variable in their carefully controlled world, and their eyes, though polite, held a keen, speculative edge. Luca, his hand resting lightly but firmly on the small of her back, a gesture that was both subtle and undeniably possessive, guided her through the displays. He spoke little, merely offering brief, incisive comments on the art, his voice a low rumble beside her ear. Emily found herself mesmerized, not just by the beauty of the art, but by the quiet power emanating from him, a gravitational pull that anchored her in his dangerous sphere. The light touch of his hand was both a comfort and a constant reminder of her place beside him. As they paused before a particularly striking piece, a large, tumultuous canvas of dark blues and angry reds, a voice cut through the hushed reverence of the gallery. Luca Conti, always acquiring beautiful things. Emily's breath hitched. The voice was smooth, cultured, but carried an undercurrent of something sharp, almost challenging. She recognized the name dimly from whispers among the staff at the Crimson Orchid. Marco Rossi, a rival, a man known for his dangerous charm and even more dangerous ambition. Luca's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on her back, a silent warning. His posture, already commanding, became subtly more rigid, radiating an unseen tension. He turned, his face an unreadable mask, his dark eyes cold and assessing. Marco Rossi was undeniably handsome, with slicked-back dark hair, a knowing smirk, and eyes that were a startling shade of emerald green. He wore a designer suit, impeccably cut, and exuded an aura of casual arrogance. His gaze swept over Luca, then settled on Emily, lingering for a moment longer than necessary, an appreciative, speculative gleam in their depths. And who is this exquisite piece? Rossi purred, his smile widening, his eyes still fixed on Emily, dissecting her with a bold, predatory stare. A new acquisition, Luca? You always did have impeccable taste. The insinuation was unmistakable, the disrespect clear. He was not just admiring Emily. He was challenging Luca, subtly claiming a piece of his attention, perhaps even signaling an interest in what Luca now guarded. Emily felt a wave of icy panic. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. This was the kind of interaction she feared most, the subtle, dangerous games played by powerful men, with her as the unwitting prize. She felt exposed, vulnerable, a pawn caught between two formidable forces. She could feel Luca's hand tighten further on her back, almost painfully. Luca's voice, when he finally spoke, was dangerously soft, a low rumble that seemed to absorb all other sounds in the room. She is not an acquisition, Rossi. She is under my protection. The word protection was delivered with a chilling weight that left no room for misinterpretation. His dark eyes, usually so controlled, now held a terrifying, barely suppressed fury, a primal flash of possessiveness that sent a shiver down Emily's spine. Rossi chuckled, unfazed, his emerald eyes still dancing over Emily. Protection, is it? Interesting. I always thought you preferred a less complicated arrangement, Conti. Or perhaps he took a step closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, his gaze now direct and challenging towards Emily. You simply haven't found the right patron, Cara. One who appreciates your talents beyond just pretty tunes. He extended a hand towards her, a subtle invitation. If Luca isn't valuing your unique contributions, my doors are always open. And I pay handsomely for true artistry. The subtle implication that Emily was being held against her will, or that Luca undervalued her, was a direct jab, a test of Luca's control. Emily instinctively flinched, her eyes wide with fear, unable to move, unable to speak. His proximity, the scent of his cologne, sharp and metallic, was overwhelming. Before Rossi's hand could reach Emily, Luca moved. It wasn't a dramatic lunge or a shouted threat. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift of his body, a hardening of his entire being that radiated pure, unadulterated menace. His hand, still on Emily's back, pressed firmly, pushing her subtly but unmistakably behind him, shielding her from Rossi's intrusive gaze. He stepped forward, putting himself entirely between Emily and Rossi, a solid, immovable wall of dangerous male power. His voice, when he spoke, was a lethal whisper, devoid of any warmth, any civility. Rossi, you mistake yourself. And you mistake her. Luca's dark eyes, narrowed to dangerous slits, burned into Rossi's with an intensity that promised unimaginable consequences. She belongs to no one's patronage but her own, and her choices are her own. Understand this. Any further attempt to value her, any approach, any suggestion, any thought of her being anything other than untouchable will be the last mistake you ever make. The words were delivered with a chilling certainty, a quiet, absolute promise of devastation that echoed in the hushed gallery. Rossi's confident smirk finally faltered. The easy charm vanished, replaced by a flicker of genuine fear in his emerald eyes. He seemed to shrink, just as Henderson had, suddenly comprehending the depth of the ice-cold fury simmering beneath Luca's controlled exterior. He had pushed too far. He had tested a predator and found the fangs were sharper than he anticipated. Understood, Conti, Rossi said, his voice now tight-strained. He gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod, his eyes carefully avoiding Emily, now fully hidden behind Luca's broad shoulder. My apologies. A simple misunderstanding. He turned abruptly, his confident stride now a hurried retreat, vanishing through a side door, leaving behind only a faint metallic scent in the air. Emily stood trembling behind Luca, her heart hammering against her ribs so violently she thought it might burst. His body was a shield, warm and solid against her. She could feel the coiled tension in his muscles, the lingering heat of his protective rage. He had handled it ruthlessly, efficiently, and terrifyingly. She was safe, but at what cost? As the last echoes of Rossi's hasty retreat faded, Lucas slowly relaxed, the tension in his body easing, though the air around them still hummed with the aftershock of his quiet fury. He turned slightly, his dark eyes finding hers. There was still a dangerous glint in them, a possessive fire that both terrified and mesmerized her. Just then, Ryan Blake appeared from around a corner, his face creased with concern. He had clearly witnessed the tail end of the interaction. He walked towards them, his blue eyes flicking from Luca's stern profile to Emily's pale face. "Everything all right, boss?" Ryan asked, his voice low, a genuine worry etched into his features. His gaze lingered on Emily, a silent question. Luca merely gave a curt nod. Resolved. Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair. He looked at Emily, his friendly demeanor now tinged with a serious, almost somber expression. "You all right, Emily?" She swallowed, finding her voice a little shaky. "Yes, Ryan. Thank you." Ryan nodded, but his eyes held hers, conveying a message beyond words. "Look," he began, lowering his voice, a conspiratorial murmur meant only for her. "I know Luca, he's a lot. And he just took care of that garbage without breaking a sweat. It's impressive, I know." He glanced at Luca, who was now surveying the art with a detached air, as if nothing had happened. "But Emily, you need to understand something about him. When Luca Conti says mine, he means it. He doesn't protect. He possesses. And what he takes, he rarely lets go." The words hit Emily like a physical blow, echoing the unspoken fears that had been swirling in her mind. He possesses. And what he takes, he rarely lets go. Ryan's warning, delivered with such quiet sincerity, confirmed every dark suspicion, every unsettling realization she'd had about Luca. He wasn't just a protector. He was a force of nature, primal and absolute, and she was irrevocably caught in his storm. The security she felt was real, but it came wrapped in chains forged from Luca's unyielding will. She looked from Ryan's concerned, knowing face to Luca's imposing figure, now standing a little distance away, his back to them, contemplating a dark abstract painting. He was a shadow, powerful and beautiful and terrifying. And she was utterly, profoundly, undeniably his. The fear was potent, but so too was the strange, magnetic pull, a dangerous longing she couldn't ignore. She was walking a tightrope between terror and a forbidden devotion, and with every passing day, the rope felt thinner, the fall more inevitable. She knew what she was stepping into, what he truly was. And a treacherous part of her, the part that had yearned for rescue from the abyss, was ready to embrace it. The penthouse had long since fallen silent, save for the hum of the city far below and the soft, resonant chords Emily coaxed from the grand piano. It was nearing midnight, the sky outside a velvet canvas studded with a million indifferent stars. She had been playing a haunting, improvised melody, a tune that wove together her lingering fear, her bewildering gratitude, and the forbidden pull she felt towards Luca Conti. The keys felt like an extension of her soul tonight, each note a whispered confession. She was alone, or so she thought. Luca usually retired to his study after dinner, emerging only for hushed calls or terse instructions to his security detail. But as the last, lingering note faded into the profound quiet of the vast living area, a soft click echoed from the doorway of his study. Emily's breath hitched. She hadn't heard him enter, hadn't sensed his approach. He moved like a shadow, a silent, potent force that always seemed to materialize out of thin air. Lucas stood in the threshold, his figure framed by the warm glow emanating from his study. He wasn't in one of his impeccable suits. Instead, He wore dark trousers and a simple, fitted black shirt, the top buttons undone, revealing a glimpse of tan skin and the subtle curve of muscle beneath. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd run a hand through it countless times. He looked tired, human, and undeniably, breathtakingly dangerous. Her heart gave a frantic leap against her ribs. She was suddenly acutely aware of her own presence, the soft light illuminating her in the vast, silent room. The cashmere shawl, his silent gift, felt like a heavy burden on her shoulders. Still playing, he asked, his voice low, a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very air. It wasn't a question, but a statement, an observation. "Ah, yes, Luca," she replied, her voice a little breathless. His name, spoken aloud, felt like a transgression, a delicate balancing act. He walked slowly into the room, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. He moved with an innate grace that contradicted the sheer power he exuded. He stopped a few feet from the piano, close enough for her to catch the faint scent of his cologne, that familiar blend of sandalwood and something sharper, more primal, now softened by a subtle note of rich aged whiskey. He held a crystal tumbler in his hand, the amber liquid swirling with a few ice cubes. That piece, it was different, he observed, his dark eyes, usually so guarded, holding hers with an unnerving intensity. What was it? Emily hesitated, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of a black key. It was just something from my head. My own. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, his gaze never leaving her face. It sounded like yearning. The word hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. Emily felt a blush creep up her neck, hot and undeniable. He saw too much. He heard too much. Her music was usually her shield, but with him, it seemed to be a window into her very soul. "Sometimes, there is a lot to yearn for," she whispered, her gaze dropping to her hands, suddenly fascinated by the intricate patterns of her own fingertips. She hated how vulnerable she felt under his scrutiny. A treacherous part of her craved it, craved to be seen, truly seen by him. Luca walked past the piano, towards the grand, floor-to-ceiling windows. He stared out at the glittering cityscape, a silent, imposing silhouette against the night. The city, his domain, lay spread out beneath him, a testament to his power. But tonight he seemed less like a conqueror and more like a lonely king. Emily watched him, her heart aching with a strange, burgeoning empathy. Ryan's warning about Luca's possessiveness still echoed in her mind, a chill reminder of the dangerous nature of this man. But seeing him now, in this unguarded moment, she saw beyond the ruthless Mafia boss. She saw the man who had ordered her favorite tea, who ensured her sister's care, who listened to her music with an unwavering attention no one else had ever given her. "Do you ever sleep, Luca?" she asked, the words slipping out before she could stop them, surprising even herself with their softness. He didn't turn. "Sleep is a luxury I rarely afford." His voice was low, almost devoid of emotion, yet Emily caught a subtle strain, a hint of weariness that pierced through her defenses. She found herself walking towards him, drawn by an invisible thread. The plush carpet muffled her steps, but he seemed to sense her approach. He turned slowly, his dark eyes meeting hers, no longer cold, but holding a complex mixture of weariness, guardedness, and something else she couldn't quite decipher. "You don't have to stay up for me," he said, a subtle reprimand in his tone. "I know," she replied softly, stopping a respectful distance away, yet close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him, the faint scent of whiskey and his unique cologne. "But you don't have to be alone either." His jaw clenched, almost imperceptibly. His gaze deepened, searching hers, probing. It was a look that stripped away all pretense, all social masks. Emily felt completely exposed, yet strangely resolute. "Everyone leaves," he said, his voice flat, emotionless, yet it carried an undertone of profound, ingrained loss. It wasn't a complaint. It was a simple, brutal fact of his existence. Emily's heart ached for him. She saw the vast, empty chasm beneath his carefully constructed composure, the lonely burden of his power. "Not everyone," she whispered, taking another small step, closing the distance between them. She reached out, her hand hesitant, then rested it gently on his forearm. His skin was warm, firm, the muscle beneath taut. A subtle tremor ran through him at her touch, a barely perceptible flicker of surprise. My parents, they abandoned me when I was young, she confessed, the words tumbling out, a secret she rarely shared, a vulnerability offered in exchange for his. They left me and Maya with my aunt, then vanished. The debt, it was theirs. Their final cruel gift. Her voice cracked. So I know what it's like. To feel alone. To be left behind. To carry burdens you didn't ask for. Luca's dark eyes, which had held hers with such intensity, now softened, just a fraction. He looked at her hand on his arm, then back to her face, a raw, unguarded emotion flashing in their depths, something akin to surprise, recognition, perhaps even a flicker of pain. He lifted his other hand slowly, almost tentatively, and rested it over hers, his fingers strong, warm, and unexpectedly gentle. His thumb stroked the back of her hand, a small, intimate gesture that sent a jolt of electric awareness through her. The touch was a silent language, a bridge built between their guarded souls. The air between them crackled, thick with unspoken desires, with burgeoning trust. His gaze dropped to her lips, lingered, then lifted to her eyes again, question, raw hunger, and a hint of desperate vulnerability swirling within their dark depths. Emily, he murmured, his voice husky, barely above a whisper, his breath warm on her face. You are dangerous. She swallowed, her own breath catching in her throat, her pulse pounding a frantic rhythm. So are you, Luca. He leaned in slowly, inexorably, his eyes still locked on hers, seeking permission, offering a choice, even as his presence overwhelmed her senses. She could feel the subtle heat radiating from his body, the intoxicating scent of whiskey in him. Her heart begged her to pull away, to run from the inevitable danger. But her soul, weary of loneliness, yearned for this impossible connection. Her eyes drifted closed, a silent, desperate surrender. His lips, warm and firm, finally met hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was deep, hungry, and desperate, claiming a release of all the pent-up tension, the unspoken longing, the forbidden desire that had simmered between them for weeks. It tasted of whiskey and danger and a surprising, intoxicating sweetness. Her fingers curled around his arm, clutching him, anchoring herself to this powerful, dangerous man. His other hand moved from her back, tangling in her hair, pulling her closer, deeper into the kiss, into his world. The world tilted, spun, then settled, intensely focused on the exquisite press of their lips, the soft brush of his stubble against her skin, the undeniable surge of heat that ignited within her. This was more than a kiss. It was a terrifying, exhilarating plunge into the dark, forbidden depths of his soul. And as his lips moved against hers, a silent, dangerous whisper echoed in her mind. I am utterly, irrevocably lost. His kiss deepened, a desperate, undeniable hunger, sweeping away every last vestige of her fear, her logic. She was consumed, utterly and completely, by the man whose touch ignited a fire she hadn't known she possessed. She leaned into him, letting him take her weight, letting herself fall. Then, just as abruptly, he pulled back, his breath ragged, his dark eyes still burning into hers, filled with a raw, almost desperate emotion that made her heart ache. Mine, he murmured, his voice a low, primal growl, his thumb stroking her jawline, a silent, terrifying claim that both thrilled and terrified her to her core. Emily merely stared, breathless, lost in an intoxicating haze of his touch, his kiss, his undeniable power. Her heart was a frantic drum, echoing the tumultuous storm that raged within her. She had just tasted forbidden fruit, and she knew with a horrifying certainty that she would never be able to go back. The line was crossed, and the consequences she sensed were just beginning. The raw intensity of Luca's kiss, his whispered mine, still vibrated through Emily's entire being, a potent, dangerous melody that had overwritten all other fears. The days following that night were a blur of intoxicating confusion. She found herself acutely aware of Luca's presence, every subtle shift in his mood, every lingering glance. The golden cage now felt less like a prison and more like a sanctuary, albeit one guarded by a magnificent, possessive beast. She was undeniably, terrifyingly drawn to him, to his silent strength, his unspoken promises of absolute protection. The internal conflict raged. Her mind screamed warnings of his dark world, but her heart, foolish and desperate, began to beat only for him. She played her music with a new depth, her fingers imbued with the fire of forbidden desire. Luca, in turn, seemed to soften, almost imperceptibly. He'd occasionally linger after her sets, asking about her compositions, his dark eyes holding a rare, almost vulnerable curiosity. He was still the enigmatic Mafia boss, but for Emily, the cracks in his concrete heart had begun to show, revealing glimpses of the man beneath the impenetrable facade. One crisp autumn morning, Emily was in the sun-drenched conservatory, tending to Luca's prize-winning orchids, another small task she had quietly taken on, finding solace in the delicate beauty of the flowers. A news channel, usually muted in the background, suddenly blared a breaking report. Emily paused, her fingers frozen on a dew-kissed petal. Sources confirmed significant raids on several key distribution points for Victor Thorne's illicit gambling operations. Law enforcement agencies are crediting a major informant, whose identity remains protected, for providing critical intelligence that led to Thorne's substantial financial losses this quarter. Emily's blood ran cold. Thorne was being hit hard. Luca's shadow, she realized with a sickening lurch, had finally consumed his rival. A cold wave of dread washed over her. This wasn't just business. This was Luca's absolute, brutal form of justice, his way of neutralizing any threat, perceived or real. And she was a part of it. The fragile peace she had found here shattered, exposing the brutal reality of the world she now inhabited. She knew, with chilling certainty, that Thorne, a cornered rat, would be desperate, and desperate men were the most dangerous. Later that afternoon, a discreet burner phone, slipped into her hand by an anonymous messenger boy, vibrated. The message was terse, chilling. Maya's hospital. No, come alone. Tell no one. It included a grainy, terrifying photo. Maya's pale face, asleep in her hospital bed, a faint, menacing shadow looming in the background. Panic, cold and visceral, seized Emily. Her lungs burned for air. Or he was striking back, not at Luca, but at her most vulnerable point. Maya, her beautiful, innocent sister. The words "come alone," tell no one, screamed in her mind. If Luca knew, if he got involved, Thorne would hurt Maya. She knew it. Luca's world was ruthless. Thorne was ruthless. She was caught in the middle, and Maya was the ultimate collateral damage. She had to go. She had to save Maya. Her heart hammered, a frantic, agonizing rhythm. She considered telling Luca, but the image of his fierce, protective rage, his absolute lack of mercy, flashed through her mind. If he confronted Thorne, the stakes would escalate exponentially. Maya would be in even greater danger. This was her fight, her mistake. She had to fix it. Making her decision, she moved with a desperate, frantic energy. She scribbled a hasty note on a piece of sheet music, a desperate, fragmented explanation for Luca, for Ryan, for anyone who might find it. I have to go. Maya is in danger. Don't follow. I'll make it right. I promise. It was illogical, impulsive, fueled by raw terror and a misguided sense of self-sacrifice. She believed in her shattered state that by going alone, she could somehow de-escalate the situation, protect both Maya and Luca from a bloodier conflict. Her hands trembled as she snatched her emergency cash, a small meager sum she had kept hidden. She pulled on a dark jacket, trying to disappear, to become invisible once more. As she slipped out of the penthouse, navigating the labyrinthine corridors with a furtive glance over her shoulder at every turn, a profound sense of loss washed over her. She was leaving the golden cage, leaving Luca, leaving the dangerous comfort he offered, plunging back into the abyss she had so desperately tried to escape. Betrayal, she knew, would be the taste left in Luca's mouth when he found her note. She was breaking his trust, shattering the fragile bond they had just forged. The taxi ride to the hospital was a blur of frantic prayers and escalating fear. Her phone vibrated again, a new message from the burner phone. Hospital garage. Level B, 2. Alone? No. As the taxi screeched to a halt at the hospital entrance, Emily glanced back. The towering silhouette of Luca's penthouse loomed in the distance, a cold, indifferent giant against the setting sun. She swallowed, her throat tight with unshed tears. She was truly alone now, utterly helpless. She found a dark, cavernous parking garage. The air was thick with exhaust fumes and a chilling silence. Her footsteps echoed eerily as she descended to B2, each step a descent into pure, unadulterated terror. The garage was almost empty, a silent, menacing concrete tomb. A sleek black van, its windows tinted opaque, was parked in a secluded corner. The side doors slid open with a soft, ominous hiss. Two large figures, their faces obscured by shadows and dark clothing, emerged. They moved with a chilling efficiency, their eyes locking onto her. Emily froze, her heart seizing in her chest. There was no one else. No Maya. Only the empty space, the waiting van, and the two hulking figures advancing towards her. Thorne had lied. This wasn't about Maya. This was a trap. For her. Her breath caught, a silent scream of pure, visceral terror. She turned to run, but it was too late. Strong, unyielding hands grabbed her, clamping over her mouth, pinning her arms behind her back. The world spun into a dizzying vortex of fear and the acrid smell of chloroform. Her vision blurred, the concrete walls closing in. As she struggled, a profound, crushing regret washed over her. Luca. She had misjudged. She had betrayed. And now she was utterly, devastatingly lost. The darkness consumed her, a silent, terrifying abyss. The last thing she heard, or perhaps imagined, was a distorted echo of Luca's low, possessive voice, mine. And then nothing. She vanished. Isn't it often our past pain, more than any cage, that truly traps us? Emily's melody reminds us your worth isn't defined by your struggles or by those who tried to diminish you. Luca's fierce, undeniable love shows us that sometimes salvation arrives in the most dangerous forms, demanding you accept a protection so absolute it forces you into true freedom. It's a love that sees every scar, not as a flaw, but as a testament to your resilience. If this story touched your soul, if you believe in love that heals even in darkness, join our family. Like this video, subscribe and tell us below, I'm claimed by love. Let your melody be heard.